Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session. Uh, so this evening we have a special guest with us today, or this evening. Edward Akin Hubbard is an anthropologist, artist, and educator whose work spans the fields of contemporary art and social anthropology. He is the co-founder and artistic director of Dark Matter, an Amsterdam-based artist collective that focuses on cultural programming and critical artistic practice. Edward's projects often explore themes such as post-coloniality, urbanism, and social justice through photography, video, and installation art. Originally from Kingston, Edward holds a PhD in anthropology from Harvard University and has taught at institutions such as the University of the West Indies, NYU, and Utrecht University. His academic expertise includes experimental ethnography, gender studies, and African diaspora studies, which he integrates into his artistic practice. His notable works include Tropical Cyberpunk, a photographic series reimagining Kingston through a dystopian lens, and Hope State, which reflects on grief and memory through the landscapes of his hometown. His curatorial projects, such as those with Film Museum in Amsterdam, explore intersections of art, anthropology, and media. Edward's leadership in Dark Matter has contributed to interdisciplinary programming that addresses issues ranging from AI bias to decolonial narratives. His work continues to engage with global and local contexts, offering critical perspectives on culture and society. Let's welcome Edward as he shares with us his journey.
Thank you so very much. And let me just thank everybody again for having me. This is quite an honor, honestly. And yes, it's worth staying up till 1 a.m. Because this is really meaningful for me. I mean, just having a chance to talk to people from home and really, yeah, feel like part of something, part of a family. Um, and I'm glad that, yeah, you didn't give me any kind of guidance in terms of where to go with this, which is good because I think I really just wanted to have an informal, yeah, family talk about where I come from, how I situate myself, and yeah, and mostly how uh, photography plays a role in my practice. And I hope I can kind of elucidate what that practice really is. Um, to just kind of give you some idea of how I approach or how I come to photography, I guess. Um, yeah, and I guess I just have to start with myself and just tell a little bit about my own story and where I come from, because I think that's really integral to my practice and to all the things you heard earlier about anthropology and all this stuff. The one little correction I will make is you say I'm originally from Kingston, Jamaica, which is yes, slightly, which is true, but not entirely true. I'm sure all of you hear an accent. I was actually born in Guyana to a Jamaican mother and a Guyanese father, and raised a part of my life in Guyana. But basically, coming down to the end of the 80s, when the Guyanese economy fell apart, my Jamaican mother said, "To hell with this. I can't stay here. This is hell." And she packed us all up and we moved to Jamaica. So I moved to Jamaica and in my teens, and I mean, as in permanently to settle with the family, and finished up. I went to high school at Wolmer's, and after Wolmer's after Wolmer's I went to I worked for a bit at the revenue board downtown. That was my first job out of high school, and then went to UWI, UWI Mona. So I went to UWI and pursued a bachelor's in mass communication, specializing in TV production. So that kind of led me into the arms of media. So I was a TV reporter at CVM for a few years. And I think that probably is I considered one of my, still my favorite job I ever had of all time. And I think it also really was formative in getting me to see where I was going to go for the rest of my life, how I was going to take my studies and my thinking. And I think it was a friend of mine who was in law school at the time at Norman Manley who said to me, you're so opinionated and you like to study culture. Why study journalism? Why don't you study anthropology? And to be quite honest, I mean, I even as an undergraduate at UWI, I wasn't really, because we don't offer anthropology, I mean, as a discipline at UWI. So of course, I studied sociology. I knew it was a social science. I wasn't really absolutely sure. So I took a minor in anthropology, took a few courses under Barry Chevans and Don Robotham, and ended up going to do my master's in anthropology at Chicago, after which I came back home and taught at UE for some more time. And after that, I went off to do my PhD at Harvard, as was said earlier. So so I think the first thing is to say I really kind of see myself as someone who is I wouldn't call myself homeless. I have multiple homes, I think, because even as a PhD student, I started to study things like Caribbean. Well, I mean, I was interested in studying Caribbean culture and Creole cultures and Creolization, but in the end, I chose to go all the way to West Africa to study Cabo Verde, to Cape Verde, the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of West Africa, which I chose because I find Cape Verde very, very similar culturally to the Caribbean and especially to places like Jamaica. So I felt it would give me a very sort of comparative perspective. So I lived in Cape Verde for more than 3.5 years. They speak they speak a patois, basically, a Creole of Portuguese. So I had to be fluent in both Portuguese and that Creole. And then Cape Verde kind of became one of my homes as well. So after that, I was teaching at NYU. After I finished my PhD, my first job was at New York University, and then now I'm at Utrecht University. Those two jobs, NYU, I think first was the job that kind of, when I started teaching there, it kind of shifted my focus because I realized, and I wasn't the only one, I'm not the only one, that my discipline, anthropology, and I kind of still haven't said what it is about. Anthropology really is a very colonial discipline, to be quite honest. It's a discipline sort of mired in, well, first of all, it came out of colonial contact, and anthropology kind of grew in the 19th and 20th century into this discipline that involves white men, essentially, going to quote unquote uncivilized places of the earth and studying the natives. I mean, that's really the classical idea of what an anthropology is, but an anthropologist is. But I think over the past few decades or so, I think round about the late 60s into the 1970s, there's been a lot of rethinking of this discipline. And one of those things, of course, is rethinking the power dynamics in this discipline, the racial dynamics of this discipline. So I kind of entered this field in a sense as an outsider because I became an anthropologist after first being a journalist. I think the two things are really connected in certain ways. But what makes anthropology, I guess, distinct from let's say sociology or anything else is, well, especially in America, anthropology really is the study of culture, as they say. It's no longer the study of non-Western cultures, but it's a study of culture generally. So anthropologists study all kinds of cultures. Another thing is the research anthropologists do is called ethnography. So that's where that word comes from. And ethnography is just a big word for going somewhere and hanging out for a long time even living in this place and getting a really, really global sense, a deep sense of how this culture works. And secondly, ethnography is also the practice of recording and understanding what what is meant, what is the significance of culture and cultural practices. So yeah, I think that's in a nutshell what anthropology entails. But what I have to say is anthropology has also been a very traditional discipline. I think for the most part, I think over the past more than a century, it has existed. It's, you know, the majority of anthropologists see themselves as scientists, but I think that idea has been challenged now for quite a long time, just because I think to really grasp the essence of a culture, it's really limiting to kind of just go there, hang out, and then write a book. Just write some long book full of prose about what this means and what that means in the culture. So for a very, very long time, anthropologists have been playing around with and experimenting with other modes of doing what they do, of describing how cultures work and what things mean in a culture and what cultural patterns are. For several decades now, we've had visual anthropology as a kind of subdiscipline. Um, and visual anthropology has almost kind of become a thing unto itself. You now have departments of visual anthropology as distinct from just social anthropology. But I think even more recently, within the past 20 or so years, there has been a really, 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 really sort of exciting set of developments within the discipline where anthropologists are now really, really experimenting more with art itself, and particularly fine art, as a mode of capturing what we call culture. Just because, for the same reason, we can't just simply capture the essence of culture by writing about it. It's not just boring, but it's also, like I said, extremely limiting and unidimensional because culture is something that happens everywhere. We believe culture happens in every nook and cranny, everywhere you turn, everything we do is culture. So I personally feel and I've felt that art is probably one of the most effective ways to kind of translate what it is that we see, I guess, out in the world. So that brings me to what my practice really is. I would say I first had the idea to start moving in this direction when I was at New York University. I started teaching a course there called Experimental Ethnography in Black New York. And what I did here was instead of giving my students assignments to go out and do field research in New York City, what I wanted them to do is to go into Black communities, particularly in New York City, in Caribbean communities, in Afro-Latino communities, in African communities in New York City, and try to see if they could use their own performance skills, their own recording skills, their own photographic skills as amateurs to just kind of go out there and come back with some kind of report, some kind of treatise on what they've seen out in the field. And I told them I don't want to just come back and write. And I think that really is what kicked off what I guess I can now call the whole sort of trajectory of my career. Because that sort of turned into now what is now nearly 12 years of teaching experimental ethnography. I first taught it at New York University for about 2 years, and then I got hired by Utrecht University in the Netherlands to come to that university in order to design a master's program, which is still in existence, called Arts and Society, of which the research stream of the master's program is experimental ethnography, my practice. So I've been teaching that for some time. You mentioned my artist collective, Dark Matter. Well, Dark Matter is composed of most of my students. Most of the members of Dark Matter, my collective, are actually my former students from Utrecht University, with whom I decided to start this collective. And so we all kind of have some relationship to this practice in one way or another. So with all of that said, I kind of also want, I don't want to just be chatting and chatting, but I want to also kind of walk you through a little bit of my, maybe just a slice of my work to kind of show you and talk you through maybe a little bit about my process. And the thing that I find is my favorite aspect of this work is thinking about how I approach this conceptually as an artist, but also as somebody who is really keen on understanding cultural codes and how to actually describe them to other people and capture something that's culturally meaningful about a place. Um, I should also say my career has taken me in a lot of different directions. So I haven't focused specifically on one place, although I think most of my work so far has been on Jamaica. I've done quite a significant number of series in Jamaica and work related to Jamaica. But of course, I mentioned I've done work in Cape Verde. I have done work in Brazil. I have done work in China, Hong Kong, Thailand, um, and South Africa, and the list goes on. So I think I'm really proud of having developed a kind of international perspective, I think, a transnational perspective, because it really helps me to understand local problems, I guess, in various places. I go to Cape Verde and I'm working on something and it suddenly hits me, oh my God, this is exactly what we experience in Jamaica. And just one example that comes off the top of my head is I was some years ago working on a curatorial project that was based in the Cape Verde Islands, and this curatorial project was really about water consumption, and specifically water consumption water consumption in the context of all-inclusive resorts in the Cape Verde Islands. And it blew my mind just because while working on this curatorial research, I realized that I already had a lot of this research under my belt, having come from the Caribbean, having come specifically from Jamaica, where we have exactly the same kinds of issues. When it comes to all-inclusive resorts, namely the amount of natural resources that are spent on all-inclusive resorts, the way that the local population is shut out economically from all-inclusive resorts. And I've long been very fascinated by the question of beach access in places like Jamaica ever since I was very young living in Jamaica. It always really bugged me and annoyed me and angered me that places like Jamaica and many places across the world have essentially taken away the commons, things like the sea and the beach, where in most contexts the beach belongs to everyone, but in Jamaica it isn't. Beaches are privatized and people can't get access to it. So I'm saying all this to say that doing work, this kind of work in one part of the world, often really illuminates and expands my understanding of things I've encountered in other parts of the world. So I really feel it is important for me, at least for my practice, to kind of continue doing what I'm doing, which is kind of moving around and really getting to know places that I've visited multiple times and people I know very dearly, including my hometown and my family and my friends. So these are all very important components of what I call my research. Um, and as far as the practice goes, as I kind of go through some of my series, I can kind of talk about how concepts come to mind, but also try to see if I can show you how maybe I interpret my own work, maybe give you some tools as to see how it is that my work means something, and maybe give you some idea of how to interpret what I do. Is that clear so far?
Yes.
Sure. Okay, so what I'm going to start by doing is sharing my screen, and please let me know if you can see. Yes. Is this visible to everyone? I'm not sure. I'm not using my own laptop, right? So can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. Good. Perfect. So let me see if I can do a full screen of this. Yes, good. Lovely. Okay, so I wanted to start with one of
Hold,
my early.
hold on up here.
Sure, sure.
So what you're seeing now is the um, Explorer window.
Oh, you're just seeing the Explorer window. You're not seeing the slide.
No, not. Are
Oh,
you using two screens?
I am. I'm supposed to be sharing the screen. So let me see why. And it says I'm sharing my screen. Huh. Okay, let me see if I can.
All right, what you can do is um, unshare and then
Okay.
share the presentation instead of the screen.
Oh, share the presentation instead of the screen. Just give me 1 second. Let me. 1 second. Sorry, I'm just calling somebody to help me with tech. Mhm. 1 second. Can you see it now?
Yes,
Global geometries, is that what you're seeing?
yes, that's it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Perfect. Okay. So yes, I wanted to kind of start with maybe one of my earlier series, I guess, is it's called Global Geometries. And I think I wanted to start here because I think conceptually, I would say this is more or less one of the simpler ideas that I've been working with. But yes, Global Geometries is a black and white series, which I started more than about a decade ago. And this is where I really started thinking about, well, first of all, cities. Having lived in many different cities, and I've been very passionate about urbanism, and I've been teaching urban studies in my anthropology classes for many years. I started really in traveling around the world, really looking at what makes contemporary life what it is in the world. And one of the things I've realized is we have globalization has happened to such an extent that we you can start to see a very familiar aesthetic almost everywhere you go in the world now because of globalization. And I was trying to think of, well, having traveled to all these different places, what are some of the things aesthetically that I can say really show us that we are in many ways evolving into a very into very similar cultures because of globalization. We're in a sense we have cultural distinctiveness, but we are losing some of that cultural distinctiveness. I wouldn't call this series necessarily a criticism of globalization, but just really a commentary on globalization, without much judgment. So what I did was with the lens was to try and see if I could capture what I see as the lines, um, the specific kinds of lines and geometries that are really common that you see in many different places, regardless of the socioeconomic circumstances of the place. And so this is a series that kind of goes from one place to another place to another place, but kind of telling a story about how geometry itself kind of forms the world we live in. Let me see. Uh-oh. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not using, I just need to switch slides now. Yes. Good. Perfect. Good. So this is now, I guess you can see the first photograph. Now, this is actually Utrecht, the city where I work. I currently work where I'm assistant professor. And this is just an example of what I mean when I say the different geometries of globalization. And why is this about globalization? Is because having moved to the Netherlands, I was really fascinated by how, and I'm sure anybody who's been to Europe is fascinated by how European cities maintain themselves and almost look like they might have looked 200 years ago. While at the same time, modernization is happening at a very steady rate in across European cities. And in particular, Utrecht is a city almost overrun with tourism. So this was something I was really trying to capture in this photo, is to kind of look at Utrecht both as a kind of a very small, very, very, very well-maintained, beautiful old city in the Netherlands, but a city like most cities in the Netherlands that is really, really experiencing a tourism boom that might be much more than the place can handle. I'm sure you might have read some of the articles coming out about over tourism in Europe. I think this was one of the concerns I had when I started working on this series. But just looking at, on the one hand, um, the geometries that sort of make the modern world visible and tangible and readable to us, but also thinking about some of the issues that make the modern world what it is. And I think one of them is tourism, but also historical restoration at the same time. So I think this photo, I think, really just speaks to how those things all sort of are balanced together when observing a place like this. This is, of course, Cape Verde. I shouldn't say of course, because it's not really obvious, but this is actually Mosteiros, which is a very small rural town I lived in the north of the island of Fogo on the Cape Verde Islands. The Cape Verde Islands are just right off the coast of Senegal, West Africa. And I lived here for almost a year. And what this is a photograph of is actually the seaside down in the village of Mosteiros. And what you're seeing in front of you, obviously, is a shipping container. And once again, I've been very fascinated by things like shipping containers, and how shipping containers kind of really define our transnational experience. One funny joke was, when I was living in Cape Verde for almost a year, I took a barrel full of books. When I was still doing my PhD, I went from Boston all the way to Cape Verde with a barrel full of my books. And when I was finished doing my research there, I decided to pack the full barrel and mail it from Cape Verde back to Massachusetts, where I was studying. And the joke was that when I went down to the wharf, the people were freaking out because they said, "You want a barrel to go from here to America?" Why? Because barrels, just like with Jamaica, people in Cape Verde rely on barrels. And this was literally the first time anyone had ever come with a barrel to the wharf to be sent in the opposite direction from Cape Verde back to the United States. There was no paperwork, there was no bureaucracy or anything to deal with my situation. So in a sense, that's one of the things I want to look at. A symptom of globalization is the fact that it's so fascinating to me that we live in the Caribbean, or we live halfway across the Atlantic like in Cape Verde, but we all live the same interesting kind of life, this lifestyle where we live in societies that are essentially dependent on imports. And the shipping container becomes a kind of symbol of our survival and at the same time our dependence. Please tell me if I'm chatting too much and you want to jump in. All right. Okay, so I'm going to try to go a little faster. I don't want to bore everybody with, by just talking and not seeing enough images. This is Rotterdam, where I live, and this is Rotterdam during COVID. This was during the COVID lockdown, so I got a chance to actually go out into the city of Rotterdam and take photos like this when the place is completely empty and deserted because of the lockdown. Again, my interest was just in looking at how these cities kind of, and I'm looking here even at light, and how the light itself kind of, and the architecture of the city kind of embodies this global geometries that I'm really interested in. Now, one of the things I want to kind of say, a theme that will always come up, you'll see coming up in my work, is I like to take my lens in. I like to zoom very, very close in to capture sometimes things that don't seem to be meaningless or do not seem to matter at all, but I think really tell their own kind of story. And this is one of those images. This is just a barber shop right across the street from my house in the Netherlands. And during the summer, they just put this cat outside. But again, I'm really, really interested in looking also at this neighborhood that I live in, which is very multi-ethnic, very Muslim, and this is actually a Turkish barbershop. So once again, looking at just how things like how these images can capture very subtle things like migration stories and like aesthetics, cultural aesthetics, because honestly, you would never find this kind of cat anywhere other than outside of a Turkish store. The Turks have this really interesting, almost ornate sense of style when it comes to home furnishings. This is the Netherlands. This is a beach in the Netherlands, and I think I'm going to go a little faster. This is still the same series. Again, this is Rotterdam, but very, very interested also in things like overpasses and highways and what these things do to urban space, how they create dead zones like this. That's one of the things I'm really interested in too, like spaces like under bridges and places that are not intended for real life to happen, like this. Nobody builds an overpass expecting people to come and hang out under an overpass. So these kinds of architectural features really can create dead zones in a city, something in anthropology we call non-places. So this was where this idea came from. Okay, this is in The Hague in the Netherlands, and that's actually a ballroom event. So these are Vogue artists, Vogue dancers. I think both of them are drag queens. I'm not even sure how I ended up at this event, but I really, really was fascinated by again the lines, and in this case, I really wanted a black and white shot, but at the same time, color was really color was really interesting to me, but not in this case. I think what I do like about black and white photography is the way it can sort of capture texture in ways that color photography probably doesn't. This is on the train coming from Germany. But once again, I think in this the Global Geometries series, I'm also really interested in looking at how lines kind of explode from from the center of a shot. How it is that so many different lines kind of intersect and give you these kinds of effects where you have the outside world and the inside world side by side. Okay, this is in Cape Verde. This is just a TV broadcast, a music live performance broadcast on TV. And once again, also Praia, Cape Verde, but looking at Cape Verde has this particular kind of modernity, this modernization that interests me. We have it as well in Jamaica, but the idea of the unfinished house. Cape Verde, I think, is a much poorer country than Jamaica. And what you're seeing here is just how all of the country looks. And that's because this is a country that has lost more than 3/4 of its population to migration. Cape Verdeans, there are more Cape Verdeans living outside of Cape Verde than who live in Cape Verde. And what you're seeing here is the phenomenon of people's relatives sending money back home to build houses. But of course, the money is never enough and the house is left incomplete. And so you have cities like this that are almost entirely composed of incomplete houses. So you see the rods sticking up in the air because somebody ran out of money, and this is how the house is probably going to remain either for the long term or even forever. This is Hong Kong, downtown Hong Kong, and as well Hong Kong. Okay, this is just a residential building in Hong Kong, and honestly, I was really fascinated by housing in Hong Kong, or in fact, the lack thereof. Hong Kong is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, and housing is incredibly difficult to find. And so people literally live in these kinds of beehive structures everywhere. Again, these are just some of the themes that all sort of tie into the overall concept of global geometries. This is The Hague. New York, Amsterdam, and the Netherlands. This is, of course, the outside of a money transfer a store. You can see all the different languages because these are all the immigrants in a place like the Netherlands who go in to actually send money home to their families. All right, I think I can skip over some of these. All right. This is this is a self-portrait, a selfie. And finally, this is Cape Verde high school where I used to teach many years ago. But I again looking at the architecture itself and how similar it is to modernist architecture or even brutalist architecture in other parts of the world. There's just one way that buildings tend to look, and the materials used are very similar. So that's kind of the root of this idea. Now, secondly, I wanted to kind of quickly now walk you through, this is a more recent photo project I did. And this was the result of a residency that I did in Italy just last year. In this case, I really was just walking through the landscape, hoping to kind of find and during the residency to find some hook. And I think that's what tends to happen when I'm doing photography. I don't know what I'm doing for a while. I can spend a week, I can spend 2 weeks, I can spend sometimes months just taking photographs obsessively, and it takes a while before a concept really lands on top of me and everything starts to be defined. This was a project that I ended up in the middle of nowhere in Tuscany, in Italy, in a little village called Montegiovi, a village of maybe 1,000 people, maybe 800 people, very tiny, old, very medieval village. And of course, I went there. I am this black guy from the Caribbean, and I'm surrounded by white people in this faraway place. And I just had no idea what the hell to do and how could I, what to make, how I could make sense of this very beautiful rural, landscape around me. I mean, Tuscany is really beautiful, full of olive trees and wine. I mean, this is wine country as well. But when I started looking very closely, I started to see things that stood out. And this is kind of how it is that I come around to a concept. While I was there, I just one day just ran into this guy who is from the Gambia, of all places. Another black man, just ran into him one day there. And we started talking, and he starts explaining to me. I was like, what the hell are you doing here? What are you doing in the middle of Tuscany, of all places, and you come from the Gambia? Then he starts explaining to me that he actually got to the Gambia by way of the Mediterranean. So he was one of those refugees that you read about who braved his life on one of those boats and came across the Mediterranean all the way to Italy somehow and got this job on a farm in the middle of Tuscany. So he became one of my key informants, I guess, as an anthropologist. And so I did quite a few interviews with him while I was there. He did not become part of my series because, well, I asked him and he wasn't comfortable actually being photographed. But I think his story really led me down this interesting pathway towards what became a series known as Monuments. Why? Because this guy told me this fascinating story of how he got actually how he even ended up in Italy. Is that he walked all the way from Gambia, West Africa, all the way across the Sahara Desert to Libya, and then found his way onto a boat and came across. So he was just explaining to me that, yeah, this was the journey. His entire journey took 3 years. 3 years. He walked for 3 years to Libya on foot through the desert. So the other thing that struck me is Montegiovi, where I was staying, is a tiny little village full of elderly people. And what I also discovered is that this village voted overwhelmingly for the right-wing party that is now headed by Giorgia Meloni. I mean, she's pure evil. I mean, she's a neo-fascist, really. And she's one of the people that have most Europeans really afraid now, because she's kind of like the female Donald Trump, and she's now basically the leader of Italy. So I went there shortly after the elections. And while staying in this city, in this town, I started to realize that, yeah, you could almost feel how this little place was being transformed. In fact, the first contradiction that hit me is that this little town voted overwhelmingly for a far right party, a party that is very anti-immigrant, a party that is extremely racist. But this is also a place that hires immigrants to work on the farms, like the guy I met from the Gambia who walked for 3 years. So there's this really bizarre contradiction of a rural place in Italy voting for a right-wing government, a racist right-wing government that wants to kick out all immigrants, but a place that literally hires immigrants to work on its farms, and a place that is struggling to stay alive because young people are just moving out and going to the big cities, and these little tiny villages that make wine and olive oil are dying. So that's what this whole project was about. I started to ask myself, what is a monument exactly? A monument to me is just anything that really represents a people's collective sense of themselves, a people's collective sense of their past. So a monument, and I started to think about what are different monuments. Monuments are not just simply statues and artworks that are in the public space. A monument can be anything, can be a piece of graffiti. So throughout this series, I decided to just focus my energies on what a monument could be in Montegiove. Of course, this first example is a motorcycle, right? But I think what I'm interested in as a photographer here is the juxtaposition of, this aging medieval village with this highly futuristic piece of machinery sitting at the center. I should also say that this series also isn't just about anthropology, and that's the other thing I want to talk about today. Is it's not just about how I see the world, but it's also about me, and it's about my own subjective feelings, because I think that's also part of the story. The stories we tell as photographers is we're telling stories about the world, but we're also telling stories about ourselves. I think that's really integral. So to me, this series also really captures a lot of my own struggles with my own mental health struggles. I was severely depressed while I was doing this series. I think that's one of the reasons it's in black and white. So in a sense, I was also, while looking at monuments in this place, I was also thinking about my own mental monuments. What's going on in my own head? What are the things that feed my depression? What are the things that feed my anxiety? Maybe what are some of the things that feed my own self-loathing at times? So in a sense, all of the titles of this series bear some kind of connection to mental health. Like, for example, this is just called Motorcycle. That's the title. I chose the title because I'm thinking here on the one hand of the motorcycle you're seeing in the shot, but I'm also thinking about the act of cycling through your thoughts. That's what happens when you have an anxious brain, is that you're always processing things, you're always overthinking things, you're always thinking that something bad will happen, etc., etc. So this is why the title is Motorcycle. This is, again, same town, but I'm thinking about all of the themes I just started out by talking about how this town itself is dying. This is a dying place, a place that is losing its life every day. So while I walked around the town, I started to see all of these images of disposal. That's what I call this title. The title of this piece is called Disposal. And you see from time to time, you see these kinds of things sitting outside people's doors, these sort of very old, something like this, like an old bathtub just sitting there idly outside. But it really, really gives you this general sense of a place that is vanishing very, very quickly before our eyes. Okay, this is just called Stone, but I think once again, and for this series, I was really interested in, and it's after I went through all of them and I started to realize that almost every single shot in this series has something, almost resembles the human eye. And that is what brings me back to this question of mental health and depression. I have eyes all through this series. I guess those are my Easter eggs. This, of course, is the sign, the ruins. I guess this is the medieval entrance, the archway to Montegiove, the square of Montegiove. And this here is, believe it or not, 1,000-year-old olive tree that I managed to encounter and had the great fortune to photograph. I love this shot just because it reminds me so much of an old mother, like a kind of mother of the earth figure. to think that this damn tree has been sitting down for 1,000 years while we've had wars and we've had, genocides and we've had all kinds of things happen. And this living thing is still bearing, it's still bearing fruit. So in a sense, while I'm thinking about the place and the fact that it's dying, including the olive oil industry in this place. I think that's what this captures the olive oil industry that is really facing a precarious future. But at the same time, it's also a reassuring image to me about the maternal. I lost my own mother several years ago, about 24 years ago. I lost both my parents in the same year. So this image really does kind of have several layers, I think, to it. It really sort of is almost like a kind of tribute to my own mother. I'm kind of just gonna move through this so I don't take too much time. This, believe it or not, is a carrot plant. And part of the series, when I'm thinking about monuments, is also to think about the ecology of this place. I think the previous shot is the same thing. I looked at all these symbols of a disappearing lifestyle, a disappearing economy, a disappearing livelihood, and that's what this is. This is an old wine cask that I found on one of the farms in Tuscany, just sitting down there, falling into disrepair. And this is a carrot plant. And like I said, this is really about also capturing the ecology of the place, the plant life, the botanical life, the things that make this place so beautiful, the things that, and let me see if I can get political about it. I was really interested in looking at some of the things that white people in these places really think they're losing. With the influx of immigrants and with the changing of the world. These are the kinds of, I'm trying to see what it is that these white people fear so much. What is the lifestyle they think that they're protecting? This is an irrigation, the irrigation system for the olive grove, basically. So this is a very old form of irrigation system. Like I said, is probably on the out because of climate change, of course. I mean, this region has been struck severely by droughts and other kinds of other aspects of climate change. So in a sense, I'm trying to kind of salvage images like this that may not be around in a few generations from now. Okay, all of these are some street scenes of this little old tiny town. As you can see, it's absolutely deserted. There's nobody, there are no young people out at night. Like I said, going back to this image, I'm going back to the notion of a dying place. This piece is called Sentinels. And I took it when I was literally walking around in a fit of absolute depression. I was almost in tears when I took this. So I really, and I've taken even the timestamp of these. I know exactly the time of night when I took this, because the entire series is also a kind of documentation of where my brain was. Likewise, this piece is called Joy. So again, I'm just trying to show you how it is that the landscape itself becomes a kind of patterned reality for me that I'm trying to both, a reality that is both outside of me as well as inside of me. And yes, it's called Joy because I was walking towards this tree and it's just taking one. I didn't even realize how much it looked like a bird. This beautiful image of a bird, just that's what I saw in front of me, just perched by the side of the road. While at the same time, this was also very a day I was really struggling with depression. I can sort of go through all of these. These are all the various types of monuments that I encountered. This particular piece is one of I have a series called Mirror, like various mirrors in this series, and this is one of the directional mirrors that you see coming down the mountain from Monte Giove. But the reason I have it here, and the reason why this particularly why I like the shot so much, is because again it looks like the human eye, and in this case I'm thinking about, it looks like a bloodshot eye. It looks like, and I'm thinking here again about the old population of this place, waking up in the morning and realizing, oh my God, my culture is disappearing from me. The idea of sleepless nights, the idea of the bloodshot eye. As in the bloodshot, you see the leaves, the pine leaves off to the corner almost look like veins. Once again, this, of course, I think really exemplifies what I was talking about when I mentioned the anti-immigrant sentiment. Now, this piece of this graffito may not necessarily be talking about immigrants, but in the context of my series and in the context of the lens, the photographic lens I'm using for this series, and when I was doing this work, I really felt that this door was so symbolic. I went in. It's actually it's a disused public bathroom I found in the village in Montegiove, tucked underneath a hillside. Nobody ever goes in there. And I walked in and turned around, and there I saw this written on the door. But as I was thinking about it, as I took the photograph, I was thinking about the series. I was also thinking about the story I told you earlier about immigrants and refugees coming to Europe on ships. In a sense, this image represents European immigration policy. You know, the open door that tells you, come in, we welcome you. And written on the same door is, I will kill you, or I kill you. So in a sense, as I said, the image really sort of, to me, is symbolic of, European immigration policy at this point. The utterly ridiculous and contradictory sentiments expressed by European immigration policy. Okay? And in this series, of course, I found, why is this a monument? For several reasons, this image was selected for the series. One, of course, it's a monument to COVID-19. You know, what you're seeing there, of course, is a face mask that was obviously discarded at some point because I went to this place post-COVID. So what you're seeing there is a face mask. But at the same time, the composition of the shot, I think, implies an eye with a hole in its head. I don't know if you can see that. As in, to the upper left corner, looks almost like a hole in its head. So in a sense, this really kind of almost dramatizes suicidal thoughts in my head. Okay? And right, I think I can kind of skip over some of this. Pericolo frana means danger, landslide. And I think all of that is really, and as you can see, I deliberately included my shadow in this shot. First of all, to kind of suggest that, yes, the photographer is here. I want to imprint myself. But as you can see, my shadow looks like an eye as well, the human eye. Pericolo frana in Italian simply means danger, landslide. But I think this also, there's a double entendre, there's a kind of double speak there, because I'm also talking about landslide in terms of elections. They just won, the far right just won the Italian elections by landslide. And finally, this is just a car I saw. And again, it's not until you take the shot many, many days, sometimes weeks later, that you come back to it and you realize what you're really going for. But changes in the air, I think, is clearly a very poetic kind of rumination on what we're all talking about, how this city, this little town full of old people is slowly disappearing. And maybe the sense of paranoia and the sense of despair that kind of hangs in the air is exemplified by this. As you can also see, it's an eye. The whole composition of the shot is also a human eye. It looks like a human eye staring in fear. And of course, my shadow is in this shot as well, in place of where the sort of male, this is from Frozen, so it's the male protagonist from Frozen. That's my body almost in this place. Okay? All right, so having gone through all of that, which I really didn't expect to spend so much time on, I think, and how much time do I still have? I think it's now 2:05. Hello?
No, you can just continue.
Sorry?
You can continue. Persons are fine.
I can continue. Yes. Okay, so now right, thank you so much. Now, having said all of this, I want to now walk you through some of my, particularly my Jamaican series. And to maybe give you, I think, and of course, you will see lots of familiar things here. And just to talk about how I conceptualize these series, and what I did, what I was thinking about, and also how the images themselves sort of came into existence. Now, Last Resort, like I said earlier when I was telling you about that curatorial project in Cape Verde, about all-inclusive resorts. Since I was in high school in Jamaica, I have been fascinated by tourism in Jamaica and the tourism product. But I've also been interested in the kind of culture that tourism produces within Jamaica. And in this case, I remember my first when I moved to Jamaica as a teenager, my first trip out of town was to Ochi. And it had such a massive impact on me as a Guyanese teenager who had never seen a real beach before. And I fell so hard. I fell so deeply in love with Ocho Rios and maintained that love for many years. I mean, even years later, when I was writing my master's thesis, I went to stay with a friend in Ocho Rios and I did it there. When I was writing my PhD thesis, I came back home and stayed on the North Coast and wrote my PhD thesis there. So I've developed over the years, and then at one point I was living on the North Coast for almost a whole year at one point during my PhD. So so the North Coast has always been in my thoughts, and particularly looking at the culture of the North Coast. Now, Last Resort was an idea I had. I started a series years ago. I would say around about 2016, 2017 is when I started really working on this series. So it's been a long, long time. I'm not even sure if I've finished it yet. But to cut a long story short, what I was interested in is looking at how Ochi had changed. Ochi and St. Mary had changed so much over the years. I mean, the entire has changed since I first encountered it as a teenager. And I think one of the things I was really interested in looking at all of the things that have really, really shifted and changed life in a place like Ocho Rios. And of course, the first thing that jumps out at me is the all-inclusive resorts and what that does to the place. The way it, of course, takes all of the economy off of the streets and into these humongous resorts. I look at the Ocho Rios craft market that I remember. I look at the streets of Ocho Rios that have far fewer tourists than I recall. And then, of course, like I said earlier, I'm very interested in questions of beach access and how it is that ordinary people get shut out of their own country's commons, what we call the commons. The natural features of a country that should be shared by all. So in a sort, Last Resort became a kind of lamentation on the Ocho Rios that I remember, and a kind of the shock to the system that I experienced going to Ocho Rios now. So all of these shots were taken either in Ochi or in St. Mary, and they kind of document how things have changed. I mean, this first shot is one example, and this is me leaving Ocho Rios on the regular bus. But again, this is to many of you, this looks like an ordinary shot. Again, to me, remember when I first started going to Ochi, there was no highway. There was no highway like you have it now, and definitely no toll booths. So these are some of the things I wanted to capture in this series. I hope you can see the colors in this. This one I call the spirit of independence. This particular piece. Why? Because, and I took this at a place called Villa Manda, which is in Runaway Bay. And I call this a spirit of independence, I think for obvious reasons. I really also want to think about, I'm really interested in looking at the parallels between the contemporary tourism industry and the plantation, the slave plantation. I think I'm not the first person. There are lots and lots of people who have pointed out this intersection between those two features, those two forms, the plantation and the resort. So in a sense, I was having all of these ideas in my head when I did this. But the spirit of independence to me makes me think a lot about, well, the bird representing Jamaica in a sense. The Jamaica I love, the Jamaica we all know and love. But in a sense, a Jamaica that is free, but in a sense, at the same time, hopelessly confined. And I think confined by, in many cases, just like the bird, confined by forces that are many of which are out of its own control. Um, all through the series, you will see. It's one of the first times I really started focusing on non-human subjects for an anthropology project. This is something I really, really think is important, and I teach it in my classes as well. That as a photographer and anthropologist, you can't always be looking at people. The culture isn't only to be found amongst people, but culture is everywhere. In this case, this is a fish tank, an aquarium at the same place, Villamanda. But I'm also thinking about, well, what the fish tank symbolizes in the context of Jamaica. The fish tank itself is a symbol of class and class status in Jamaica. Um, or I mean, and there are many layers to this. There are many ways you can interpret it. You could think about the idea of fish, the idea of we as a people are almost like fish, in a sense. Just kind of placid and left to our own devices and utterly dependent on the people who feed us. Okay. Um, this, like I said, I really for the first time started focusing on natural subjects, on nature, on animals, on insects, etc. But again, the whole essence of this series is to try to capture some of the things that I think represent the resort, the Ocho Rios that I knew and loved, that is quickly disappearing. So that also includes things like this. It also includes things like all of the things that sort of remind, and there are all kinds of resonances, I think, with Jamaican national symbols. This is a butterfly endemic to Jamaica. So, and you'll see quite a lot of examples of this. Okay, this is the commissary at St. Mary Country Club. Okay, uh, and this is a piece I call Doc, just DOC, Doc. Why this photograph took me quite a long time and a lot of care to take, but it was so funny how I was taking photographs that this day, and this Dr. Bird just flew out of nowhere and just came and I just perched itself right above my head and gave me a chance. It sat there and gave me a chance to photograph it for a while before it flew away. And it just reminded me of a friend of mine who I almost felt that this could have been his spirit that came to visit me. But an old friend of mine that I call Doc, who was murdered some years ago in Portland. And I always think about him every time I come back. And this was a trip where he was on my mind a lot. And when this bird just showed up, when the Dr. Bird showed up, I was like, this. So that's why I titled it Doc. In a sense, I felt like his spirit was close to me. But once again, it's all a rumination on, well, he was part of my life at one point as a friend, in a close friend in Jamaica, that I feel his absence every single time I go back. It's something that was kind of stolen, taken away from a friendship. Um, I think these images kind of give you a clear picture of what it is that I think is culturally meaningful. This I think I just love this kind of stuff just because I just love how Jamaicans, we won't look at something like this as an installation, a work of installation art, but I do and I think that's what my anthropologist eye tells me. This is an installation artist at work, and I kind of want to capture these. These are the things that really make the country so rich and the culture so rich, and things that we tend to ignore. I mean, and I want to say here too, this is, I'm not sure if anybody thought about this, but I constantly think about it. I get asked all the time, so you are an artist or a photographer and you don't live in Jamaica. Um, why do you think that's a benefit? Why do you think that's a good thing? That I actually don't live in Jamaica? No, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but I feel that it really does. Having lived away from Jamaica, I really see what, when I come back and do work like this, I honestly, I can see things that I probably wouldn't have seen if I were still living there. just because you come back and you see it with fresh eyes. You see things with fresh eyes. And I've had the experience of showing people some of my photographs in Jamaica, and they're like, oh, okay, I don't see anything special about it. But I think a lot of times it's because, you take the unique things, the things that are just unique and beautiful and exceptional about Jamaica. We who live there, when you live there for a lot of time, for much of it, for a lot of the time, you just kind of miss it. You kind of overlook it. Anyway, this, as I said, just kind of going through Ocho Rios. All of these are different aspects of life as I see it, in the direction it's going in Ocho Rios. This is in the dead center of the town. This is a piece I called, which was just published yesterday in Pre-Journal, but this is called Gothic Breadfruit. I call it Gothic breadfruit because I love breadfruit trees. I've always felt that breadfruit, there's something very spiritual about breadfruit trees, and they scare the shit out of me. When I go on the breadfruit trees, I always think that there's duppy there. So when I look at this, I always see there's something about the way, the beauty of a breadfruit leaf. But just the way this is all composed really makes me think of the Gothic in a very Jamaican sense. This is what our Gothic looks like. This is what our the aesthetic of Gothic would look like in our context, I think. All right, and well, I think this is really self-explanatory. Private property, do not enter. Again, this image would look like a very ordinary image to any Jamaican, but when you show this image to foreigners who aren't familiar with issues like beach access, they freak out. And they're like, "Are you serious? Like Jamaicans can't go on their own beaches, etc., etc." Okay, this is all from that same series. This is a piece called Genocide, and this was a fisherman, the previous fisherman that you saw in that photograph. These were his fish, and I sat down and had a little chat with him while taking this photograph and it was he who explained to me that he had to pay the actual beach to get access to the water. He went out in his little boat and came back. No, he went out diving and came back with this fish. But he explained to me that he had to pay to get access to this beach. All right. I think we can kind of skip through this. This one was also just published by Pre. I call this David and Goliath, which I think should jump out at you. David with his slingshot, with his lyre, and Goliath, of course, is the cruise ship in the background. Yeah, I think a lot of this is more than just tongue in cheek, but really trying to be both funny and provocative at the same time, and really dead serious with some of the social commentary in this. Okay, I think we all familiar with the rafters, but again, looking here at I've also been reading about a decline in rafting as well, because over the years there've been complaints that people would, some of the rafters would be attacked by people along the river. This was a growing problem up until recently. So I think this is one of the things I want to capture here is there's I remember when this was full of people, and I of course it still is, but I think I came here in the middle of the day, and this is how it looked. All right. So I hope I'm making good progress here. So this is a series I did, a fairly recent series I did last year, Tropical Cyberpunk, and I have presented this elsewhere in Jamaica. I think I did a presentation at Edna Manley last year about tropical cyberpunk. This, to me, I think is one of my personal favorites, because this is really what really took me to a different level, I think, with doing photography in Jamaica. This series was all done in Kingston. And this series really came about, I think, precisely because of my being away for some years and coming back only to visit. this is one of the things that I think gave me a very unique perspective because it was one night I was at my brother's place in Kingston, and I had an argument with a member of my family, and I was hopping mad and really angry. And I stormed out to the house and decided to take a walk to clear my brain. And I walked down South Odeon Avenue into Halfway Tree. And this is now 11 o'clock at night. So this might not have been a very, something, highly advisable, but I did it anyway. And I started at, walking around Halfway Tree at after midnight. It was not on a weekend, so the place was really empty. But some things, while I was trying to clear my head, I started to notice certain things about Kingston that I did not. I mean, this is not the Kingston I grew up with, and what it gave me was this interesting sense of the uncanny. And it was because what I started to realize is that Kingston is almost as dystopian as I remember it, in the sense of, yeah, you can see the neglect, the governmental neglect around. You can see the potholes in the streets. This is something that that was always a part of living in Kingston was, yeah, crime and potholes and sagging electricity poles and, poor maintenance of the city in general. But what was very different to me was just how much technology I was seeing everywhere. And so it gave me this idea that, and I guess I got it from watching the film Blade Runner, was that cyberpunk is a I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this is a subgenre of science fiction that really sort of revels in the idea of these futuristic cityscapes that are at the same time highly dystopian and full of crime and full of violence and full of poverty, etc., etc. And Blade Runner is one of the best examples. The Matrix is another example. To some extent, Batman is an example of cyberpunk, the cyberpunk aesthetic. So cyberpunk is usually, and you've probably seen it before but don't recognize it. It's usually a genre of science fiction where it's a city and it's all dark and everything looks like it's crumbling, but it's saturated with neon lights. And so it was kind of my familiarity with science fiction and particularly with cyberpunk, that on the night when I was walking through Halfway Tree, I thought, that's what this is. I was trying to think of what the blend of neon lights and dystopia, and urban dystopia, would make me think of. And this is when the two things kind of came together. But typically cyberpunk stories are set in places like Tokyo or Hong Kong, like a futuristic Tokyo or futuristic Hong Kong or futuristic New York. Never in a place like Jamaica. Never in a place in the third world or in the global south. So I came up with this idea of tropical cyberpunk. What would cyberpunk look like in a small tropical city on a tropical island? What would a dystopian cityscape look like in this context? Another thing I wanted to say about the series is I was also interested in looking at how Jamaican culture is futuristic, has always been very futuristic. Jamaican music has always been forward looking and future looking. And Jamaica's been, I mean, when it comes to cultural innovation, I think everybody knows that it has really made its name in the world for that. So I'm saying Jamaica's always been very, very futuristic in a sense. So this whole series was kind of like both a kind of praise song, a kind of tribute to the Jamaica, this new Jamaica that I'm now discovering, that everybody, I'm sure, who's listening to this would think, oh my God, what he's talking about is so ordinary to me. But it's a new Kingston that I didn't remember when I was younger. It's a Kingston of billboards, big electronic billboards at night. I don't remember Kingston having that when I used to walk home from Crossroads after school. Or after debate at night. I don't remember big billboards everywhere. I don't remember jumping into taxis and seeing every taxi having a TV screen playing something, or Ubers and just how these guys outfit their taxis, etc., etc. So the whole series is kind of thinking about Kingston, present day Kingston, as a futuristic dystopian city. Okay. One of the things I really encountered as well, which is something that I have been seeing for years, just going back to Jamaica, but doing this series, I started noticing yang yangs. And I realized that, and Yang Yang became really important to this series. I have multiple photographs of Yang Yangs because Yang Yangs really remind me of the type of cyberpunk stories. In cyberpunk science fiction, and there are many examples like Akira and many other like Japanese anime cartoons where the protagonist is in a cityscape filled with crime, riding a motorcycle. One of the most famous films of all time that is cyberpunk is called Akira, and it's about a guy who is on a motorcycle, basically, a kind of renegade person. And what I've realized with Yang Yang riders in Jamaica is that they have the same kind of just like in cyberpunk stories. The Yang Yang guy is somebody everybody hates and everybody fears. When you talk to Jamaicans about Yang Yangs, everybody hates them. They make too much noise. And then they themselves are seen as these dystopian figures. People tell me all the time that they engage in crime and violence, etc., etc. So the Yang Yang already is a symbol of this kind of urban outlaw in a sense. And I really love that as a narrative device in this particular series. All of this, I'm just kind of trying to capture Kingston in this way, but also thinking about Kingston as a kind of a futuristic assemblage. Okay, this is in the middle of Halfway Tree. What I did with this series, of course, is I saturated the colors. I saturated the colors a little bit because I really wanted to give it a kind of otherworldly, and I wanted it to look a bit artificial as well, because I really wanted it to look like almost like Japanese animation. So I saturated the colors, but I didn't change the tint or anything. So this is really how Kingston looks, except that I've given it a lot more vibrancy to kind of convey the effect. All of this is downtown. This is in the middle of Halfway Tree at the Halfway Tree bus stop. Okay, but again, I'm really interested in color. This here, I call it Hunger, this particular piece. This is, of course, downtown Kingston, right by Negro Aroused. Okay, this is in the middle of Parade. And I love showing this particular piece outside of Jamaica because nobody outside of Jamaica really gets what's happening. And when I show it here, I presented it here at the Eye Museum in Amsterdam, and I asked the audience, and everybody thought that this girl was being accosted by some kind of law enforcement officer or a soldier, and she's putting her hands up in the air. And then I had to, wait until everybody talked, and then I had to explain to them that no, this is actually a street service, and that woman is a prayer warrior. And of course, seconds before I took the photograph, I'm sure all of you have seen this before. Seconds before taking that photograph, the pastor who was talking at the microphone said, "There's somebody here who has stomach problems. Come forward." And this girl came forward, and the prayer warrior puts her hand on her stomach and is praying. Okay. So I managed to capture it right at that point. But the reason it is saturated red is because it's right under that billboard heading uptown. They're right under the billboard, right on the upper, what is it again? The northwest corner of Parade. Okay, and it's Christmas time, so it's a lot of the light coming from the billboards, flash red. I also like the symbolism in the background of the word meat in the background. I love that as well. Just because it kind of also it gives a sense of dystopia, the idea of this dystopian landscape at night. This is New Kingston. This is Cannonball Tree up in Mona. But again, I like it because it looks almost like an alien plant, from the future. And this, I think, is one of my favorite shots from tropical cyberpunk. And again, I don't know if Jamaicans will think this to be a very striking shot. But once again, when you show this elsewhere, people freak out because you explain to them that this is just a delivery guy. And the piece here is called Delivery. I don't know if you can see the shattered windshield of that covered van. And it's still not clear whether it's a hearse, right? Or it's just simply a van. it looks very much like a hearse. But I call it delivery, of course, to kind of present this juxtaposition of, two different forms of delivery in the city. But I think the most important thing is how these bicycles, these motorcycles look. I mean, they are so, I've never in the world seen motorcycles souped up to look like this with all these brilliant colors and so on. And it really does look very, very hyper futuristic. Okay, this is now a bar called GB's that's on Lady Musgrave Road that I always go to. This is downtown Kingston and an army patrol going through downtown Kingston. I think okay, this is Hagley Park Road. This is another piece I really like. This is at the head of the beginning of Barbican Road. But I think there's a homeless person who lives there and sells there. But I mean, I saw this written on the wall and I just couldn't pass it by. I mean, again, the sense of dystopia. This is Hellshire. And this is all the way up in Irish Town. All right, let me go quickly through. I think you all get a sense. And this is called Anansi and Tiger. Okay, for obvious reasons. I think, thankfully, I'm talking to a Jamaican audience, so you guys know what I'm talking about immediately. Okay, do I have? I think. I hope I still have time. I'm gonna try to speed up even more here. This is a series called Gated. And this I started last year around October 6th. I started this. October 7th. This was started literally the day when the Hamas attacks happened in Israel. When the Hamas fighters went in and kidnapped the Israelis and the whole war started. And I remember thinking, though, and these are just my views about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I started really thinking about the role of Israel in the Middle East. And one of the things that really got me, and I was in Jamaica when this happened, I started to think about what Israel is. And I started to think that, Israel is a gated community. That's what it is. For all intents and purposes, Israel is like a massive gated community, and it functions like a gated community. So this led me to start thinking about what gated communities are and what they do. Once again, this series, the war broke out while I was in Kingston, so I really think that I started to work on gated communities in Kingston almost as a kind of urban anthropology, because again, people in Jamaica take it for granted. You don't really have gated communities here. You don't find them that often in Europe. In parts of America, yes, and they're becoming more and more popular, but gated communities really evolved in the global south, in our part of the world. And it evolved for a number of reasons. I think in the 1980s and the 1990s, of course, it had socioeconomic reasons, but because of the upsurge in crime in many parts of the global south, including Jamaica, gated communities became almost a necessity for people. But what I'm really interested in is looking at what happens when people live in gated communities and what happens to cities when people live behind gates. And it's something, again, that I took for granted when I lived in Jamaica, because gated communities are normal. It's having lived abroad for several years and coming back home and now going through Kingston, realizing that so much of Kingston, even the Kingston I left behind, is now covered by gated communities. What does this really mean, though? And how does this relate to Israel? Well, what I think is, gated communities are, in a sense, yes, they're a means of protection, and they are, in some ways, they do provide security for the people who live in them. But it's also a kind of class apartheid, at the same time. And I think that's the connection I make with Israel. Israel is a gated community in much the same way that all gated communities are gated communities. They become fortresses, very much protected, but they're also places that maintain a strict spatial opposition between those who live inside and those who live outside. And our perception of a gated community is that I'm safe when I'm on the inside. I am not safe when I'm on the outside. And I think this is very much comparable to the Israel-Palestine conflict. So this series kind of evolved again, over time, I started really close to home. I started taking photographs within my brother's own complex, and this is in New Kingston. And I'm thinking here again about class and class apartheid and class dynamics in Jamaica. I think this first photograph really there's so many, there's so much to read from it, in terms of who these two men are, what kinds of social roles they play, and it's almost written in front of you. One man is up, seems to be sitting there waiting for the other man to complete his work. The man dressed in blue is not likely to be taking his clothes off and jumping into that pool. Okay, so once again, I think in one shot you can get so much. You can sort of read so much about class hierarchy, about occupational differentiation, and particularly about public and private space in this one shot. This again is in New Kingston, but I started just walking around New Kingston aimlessly all day for many, many days, but looking at the aesthetics of the gated community. Okay, this is a gated community off of Waterloo, and it's called Avalon. Okay, and I titled it to Avalon. And you must also think about what gated communities represent in Jamaica. They're always beautifully landscaped on the inside. There's always a sense that you are not just safe, but you're in a beautiful manicured kind of reality. Okay, so I'm really looking here, looking inside from outside, and I wanted to get that sort of perspective of what the gated community looks like from the outside. What the kind of an Avalon, names like Avalon are so important. When you look through gated communities in Jamaica, all have very colonial names. You can think about them. Waterloo Mews and this. Just think of all the multiple different gated communities in Jamaica. They almost all sound very British, or there's always a sense of a kind of British air to these names, which I think is very colonialist and is very deliberate. Okay, this is right outside my brother's complex. But what is fun, what to me is fascinating about it is not just the juxtaposition between the inside and the outside, but the date, October 7th. Which I really want to kind of have. I never explicitly tell people that this is about Israel and Palestine, but I kind of drop a lot of Easter eggs there. Okay, all of these are again the juxtaposition of inside, outside, and in the background you can see the construction happening. This here again looks at the whole aesthetics of gatedness and what it means. How these are 3 different security fences, 4 different security fences all in one. Okay, and again the outside and the inside, and a sense of the paradisial inside. The thing about the gated communities is how it sort of preserves this idea of paradise and protection. This is guest bedroom. This is the guest bedroom of my brother and his wife's house. Okay, but of course you're seeing outside. You're seeing there, and you can see the basketball hoop of the next door neighbor, which is a sign of affluence. Anyway, in any which way you take it in Jamaica, in Kingston, if you see a basketball hoop, this is affluence. But also you see the brand new construction of, what is it again? Is it 20 South? What do you call it? Is 20 South? Is that? I think that's the building right behind it. Okay. This I could just kind of flip through some of these shots, but these are all shots sort of taken within this and many other kinds of complexes. This is 20 South, the entrance of 20 South. I remember when I was taking this photograph, the security guard told me not to, and I asked him why, and he said it's not allowed. You're not allowed to take photographs of the premises, which I don't know if I should believe it, but again, it just shows you how how it is that the reality of a gated community is really constructed by all of these notions of safety and protection and security. And I mean, I suppose there's some security reason why I can't take photographs, but I managed to talk him out of it and get this photograph taken. Right? This is gridlock traffic on Waterloo Avenue, but looking from the inside out. Right? Surbiton Villa. Right. And of course, in this case, this is Devon House. This is the grounds of Devon House, and the children playing. I'm trying to show you the kind of, well, Devon House itself is kind of like, I wouldn't call it a gated community, but in the background we see the whole on that's Devon Road. We see the massive construction sort of rising in the distance, while the children in the foreground sort of play in this carefree way. Right? This is one neighbor speaking to another. Again, this too, again, the sense of this is the swimming pool, communal swimming pool, neighbors speaking to each other. This is in Portmore, this is in Caribbean Estates. Okay, and I think the final series I will go through today before I turn it over to you for questions is the final series. This is a much more personal series I wanted to talk about because all the others I've been showing you so far are all have big sociological themes or anthropological themes or urbanism or whatever. Sometimes my work can be deeply personal, and this particular series is. I had mentioned earlier that I lost both of my parents back in 2001. I was living in Jamaica at the time and lost both of them within a space of 4 months, both my parents and my grandmother. And it really messed me up. Like it really, really messed me up mentally for many, many years. I couldn't get over it. And I realized also for many years, I couldn't even go in certain parts of Kingston. I couldn't walk in certain parts of Kingston because it would just trigger me. I would break down in tears. It would be really difficult for me. I think the whole Mona area became that place for me, just because, for the most part, my family, we were all sort of orbiting UE. Both my parents attended UE. I attended UE, and I just found Mona was a place my whole reality kind of revolved around for many, many, many years. And then this was also all of my family members were buried in the same place at the Mona Chapel. And I had never, since 2001, I had always avoided these areas. Hope Pastures, in particular, was a place I avoided because it has so much significance to me, having gone to UE, having been there so many times. But Hope Pastures was where my parents famously got married. On their wedding day, my parents did not have a traditional wedding. My parents went down to the registry, got married, and then jumped on a bus and went up to Hope Pastures and walked around Hope Pastures, and that was their wedding day. That's all, just the two of them. And so Hope Pastures always has this significance to me. And also, of course, Hope Pastures, Hope Estate itself was the original title for that tract of land on which Hope Pastures and UE now sit. So it was actually the name of the plantation. It was called Hope Estate. But of course, because I really wanted to now go back to those spaces myself and confront some of those spaces. And so I did that. I decided to come home to Jamaica, and for the first time, I went up to Hope Pastures, walked around, went up to the Mona Chapel, and I walked around. And honestly, it was really disturbing. I could hardly contain myself. I cried several times while taking these photographs. But I felt like I had to not put this aspect of my life to rest so much as confront it, really confront it. So Hope Estate is really about a series about grief and coping with grief, overcoming grief, and in some cases not overcoming grief. So this is probably the most the photo series in which I use the most symbolism of all. All the others are really sociological, I said, but this one is much more poetic and much more poetry and symbolism. The first image you're seeing there, Hope Gardens. Like I said before, it may seem ordinary to you, or it may not seem that special to you. But again, when you are not somebody who is from Jamaica, or even if you're from Jamaica, and you look at that, it's a contradictory symbol, just because you think of Hope Gardens and you think of a closed gate, and it's swooning into twilight. So the image itself doesn't really convey hope, and that was the idea. I really wanted to kind of play with symbolism in all of this. The idea of walking into this place called Hope Gardens, that really isn't a place of hope. It's a locked gate and darkness behind it. This is called Apocalypse. And I took this while I was in tears, just because it was at this moment that I recall, I think the moment that really, really, really stays in my head of my parents' funerals is this moment. It's when the funeral is done and the whole family is processing out of the church, and you turn this corner, and I saw all my family members around me weeping. And that's when you realize it's all over. That's when you realize that my parents are really gone and they're never coming back. And so, if you can notice in the background too, I think the whole image reminds me of a human eye again. You have the image of the eye, and the eye is in shock and despair. It's like what you're seeing, to me, what I see is an eyeball registering shock and despair. Okay? But this was literally how I was feeling walking around. This also this kind of just conveys the sense of topsy-turviness when you're going through grief. And once again, I'm in a place that is triggering all of these emotions at the same time. So all of these, in some way, tell part of this story of suffering and grief. I'm going on a day when I'm just walking around. Nobody, nobody's really there but this particular image is the entrance to Hope Gardens, the second entrance, which is further down towards Papine. And I just ran into this guy painting. I call this fluoxetine. Why fluoxetine is the name of an antidepressant. And just to show you the kind of how I work with symbolism, what I see here is fluoxetine. This is how an antidepressant works. Everything is gray. Your world is, you feel like shit. Your world has collapsed. This is what taking an antidepressant feels like. It's like painting a yellow stripe on an otherwise gray landscape. So that's why I call it a fluoxetine. And it's very, very, very symbolic of the struggle of overcoming grief using things like medication and even therapy, things that I sometimes doubt are effective. This is called home. And it literally takes me back to the last home we lived in after my parents died, that we vacated days after. We were renting the home, but we vacated the home days after my mother's death. Is there somebody with their hand up? Let me see. Okay. Yeah. Time up, sorry? Is that what you're saying, Boots?
No, she gave a thumbs up.
Okay, yes. So this is in Hope Gardens as well, but like I said, our family had to vacate that house within days of my mother's death, which was the third death in 4 months, and we had to vacate it quickly because our family friends and everybody said, get out of that house, right, and go to St. Thomas and take a bath, because I'm dead serious. It's like there was a rumor that my family was cursed in some way. And this is why my mother, my father, and my grandmother all dropped dead within 4 months. So these are some of the reasons why it was really difficult to really do this particular series and to confront some of these emotions that I had buried for so long. But and up to now, I've not been able to go back to that house. The house is still there in Kingston, and I can't drive down that road. I can't even go near that house. Now, once again, this now is called the death of my mother. So as I was walking through Hope Gardens, I started to pick up on things that I could use as symbolic constructs, things that could work as symbols. And so for this whole series, I started looking at dead branches to symbolize dead people. And in the case of the death of my mother died on the veranda of the house, in front of my sister, in front of my nephew, in front of other people. She died, and it was very, very sudden. She just kind of keeled over. She had an aneurysm and just keeled over and died. And so what I see in this image is her lying there, and everybody's going crazy around her. All of the leaves really just look like explosions of shock and trauma. And everybody sort of huddled together and leaning over her dead body. I wasn't there when she died, so this gives me so many ways of reconstructing the actual scene of her death. in my mind without actually using her. This is the death of my father, who was a light-skinned man. So there's a reason why I chose this particular one for to represent him. But it's the same. I exhibit them side by side, so to speak. And this is the death of my sister Anne, who really was my closest sibling. And again, I found all of these just walking around aimlessly, bawling my eyes out, thinking about them, missing them. Okay? And this whole series just looks at neglect and trying to go back to old ruins of my life and confront these old ruins. This is a street in Mona. And you know what? I didn't even see that it looked like a heart until months later when I was just reviewing the images and sort of looking over them, that it's really the image of a heart. And a heart that is really just a kind of pothole in the road. And it kind of, again, I think the symbolism is really obvious here. I see this as my family car. Okay, this was just a ruined car I saw on the side of a road behind Hope Gardens, but I take it to mean this is my family's car. This is the family car we drove in. This too, I call this dissociation, just because I love palm leaves and I love how the palm fronds, and all through the series, the dead palm leaves really symbolize dead people. But in this case, dissociation is the actual trunk of that royal palm that you're seeing in the middle, where this is the grieving process, where your head is up in the clouds. Your head is just full of all kinds of crap that your brain is just cycling through all kinds of unfortunate thoughts, and your limbs are falling from your body in a sense. So in a way, I wanted to embody the actual grieving process with this. This, of course, I call this bag of promises. And a Jamaican will understand why it's called bag of promises, because only a Jamaican will really understand that these are empty akis. And so when I call it bag of promises, I'm really talking about empty promises. And the empty promises in this case refers to, all the people when somebody dies, when they come and tell you, oh my God, I'm always here for you. Call me, please. I'm always here for you. And then, weeks after that person, if you've ever had grief in your life, this, that after a month or 2 months, people forget and people go back to their lives, and you can't go back to your life. And that's why these promises feel like empty promises. And this is deliberately tilted. This particular shot is an entrance to the chapel, and I deliberately tilted it like this, so it's off center, because I really wanted to translate this sense of swooning, the idea that I'm almost collapsing to the ground. I wanted to make you feel a little dizzy and disoriented, because this is how I felt, and this is how I feel every time I go near to this place. And this was the first time I was going near to this place in many, many years, and it really, really tore me to pieces. So, like I said, I'm crying while I'm taking all of these photographs. This is called massacre. So I guess I can, with all of that explained and said, where I'm going with all of this, because what I experienced in my family was a massacre. This is called recessional, and if you remember, in a funeral, when you're walking out of the church, it's called the recessional. And like I said, this is what I see in front of me. It's a church, it's an aisle, and I'm walking out of the church, and those are people on either side of the aisle looking at me, and I'm falling apart, and my world is falling apart. Okay, so all of these, this is called shroud, which really sort of symbolizes, the funeral shroud. And this now is, I think, the main image of the whole series. This image is called grief. And like I said, I really am concerned about symbolism in this case, because there's so many things I read in this photograph. First of all, I see a grieving family. I see members of a grieving family standing around. But in the center, I see me. And in a sense, that fence, that wrought iron fence, that has now grown and into, the tree has literally overgrown, or the tree bark has overgrown the fence and literally incorporated the fence into itself. I mean, in a sense, I think this is what grieving looks like. This is what it feels like. Especially many years after loss, after you've lost a loved one. This is really, really what it feels like. It's the loss never goes away. The thing that hurt you, the thing that is lodged in your brain, the trauma lodged in your brain never ever goes away. But you just somehow have to keep growing and have to keep absorbing it, and you just have to incorporate that grief and make it a part of yourself, because you'll never get rid of it. So again, this is another death of Norma. This is another member of my family. And this one is called Sad Clown Paradox. Funnily enough, I was taking photographs on this day. I never staged this. I didn't even know. I was just taking photographs and saw this guy. This was around Christmas time, so I think this clown came to perform at a children's event in the park in Hope Gardens, and the event was finished. And the clown just came to sit down and was, I guess, waiting on transportation. And the little boy was waiting perhaps for his parents to come and pick him up. But the whole scene looked so sad to me. And if you're familiar with the sad clown paradox, in psychology, the sad clown is typically the child who has to entertain everybody because he's deeply depressed and deeply insecure, and so he becomes the class clown. And there are lots of people, this in studies of comedians, they always talk about comedians suffering from the sad clown paradox, because a lot of comedians have very dark emotions that they suppress, and in order to try to make people laugh. So in a sense, I see this child as me. I see this child as a kind of representation of me. And that clown is this side of myself that I've always been sort of using to entertain people and make people happy and make people laugh, when in fact I'm deeply, deeply, deeply depressed inside. And so I think that's what this image, and it just happened out of the blue. It was really just a luck, the luck of the draw with this photograph, that it really does speak to something genuine in my emotional state. Yeah, I can kind of, I think, wrap up here. Yeah, well, the last series, and I'm not going to spend much time on this series, is Textilicity. And the reason is because I think some of you may have seen this series. I know Donnet has seen it and Doris has seen it. But this was the last series I did in Jamaica. And it was looking, I exhibited this series this past August in downtown Kingston. But this series really was the most fun I think I've ever had with a series. But I was looking at the notion of urban fabric, which is a concept in urban studies that refers to the way a city is composed by all of these different strands of things, like, transportation circuits and transportation networks, people, buildings, the built environment, streets. All of these things are almost like a textile. And so in urban fabric, they use the term urban fabric to describe the sort of assemblage of all of these different elements, the cultural elements, architectural elements, urban planning elements that make up a city. And I started with this concept, but I was really also looking at Kingston and Jamaica in general as a living, breathing textile. And also looking at how textile itself plays a role in Jamaican life, and in ways that we just take for granted. This first image is on Line Key, and that's actually a piece of textile, believe it or not, that just washed up and is now part of this beach. And so at first I thought it was actually a rock. It looks like a natural feature, but it's not. It's actually a piece of textile. And so this whole series really just looks at fabric or textile from a different perspective, but textile in terms of humans, in terms of places, in terms of buildings, in terms of commerce, in terms of everything. This, I think, is I find it quite funny. This is actually not in Kingston. This is in Portland. This is Frenchman's Cove. But I mean, I think its inclusion in this series is obvious. I mean, his whole skin is like a textile. The man sort of staring at the woman, and I like the idea of this white male gaze. Also, looking at this black Jamaican woman coming out of emerging or going into the water, coming out of the water. It's very, very sort of it's an almost mysterious shot, and it has all kinds of resonances. You might even say erotic resonances, you might say racial resonances, but I really, really like it for that reason. Now I call it textilicity because I mean textile in a figurative sense, but also in a very literal sense. So for this series, I did a lot of walking up and down in on Orange Street, especially, which is a textile district, has always been a textile district. My mom used to love Pablo's and all of those stores. So I just walked up and down this, and I also shot some video on the street as well. But just I was completely drawn in by the vibrance of the colors and the vibrance of the lifestyle and the method of engaging in commerce. I'm sure some of you have been down Orange Street and seen the guys standing outside on Orange Street with a microphone and the DJs, and they DJ and tell you what the discounts are and this and so on and so forth. It really absolutely fascinated me, and it also became part of this series. This is not blood. This is just wine spilled during a party on a mop. Okay. And this is the textile district. This is on Orange Street. And I tried as much as possible to look at how the way people dress is often reflected in the environment around them, how people themselves become an extension of the urban textile, like in this particular case. And I saw many examples of this. But how textiles just are everywhere and are just part of the social fabric of Jamaica. This is Portland. This is Blueberry Hill in Portland. And this one, I particularly love this shot. It's one of my personal favorites because this is down at the Masjid down on was it South Camp Road? Yes, this is the largest mosque, I believe, in Kingston, and I managed to go in and spend some time in the mosque there. And this little boy was just running back and forth between, and what he's running into the female only section of the mosque, because, and I'm standing where in the male only section of the mosque. But it's a fascinating story of textile, just because that piece of textile that is hanging there really is a very, in the Muslim religion, is a really profound piece of cloth, because that cloth separates the gendered spheres within a mosque. And this child hasn't reached 12 yet, which is why he is allowed to run back and forth between the female section and the male section, but I can't do it. So in a sense, this child is experiencing the last days of his own freedom as a man to actually move between these spaces. All right, this is another one of my favorites, but this is downtown Harbor Street, but it's a striking photo. This is the photo that gets the most reaction, I think, when I show it. It's also a very dystopian image. And it says, when speaking of anthropology, it speaks volumes. It says a lot. At first, of course, you think it's a piece of cloth. I thought it was just a piece of cloth on the ground. But when you really do realize it's a dog, a desiccated corpse of a dog, it blows your mind, because it really does say so much about, well, yeah, it says so much about governance. It says so much about the preservation and valuing of life. There's so many things you can read into a shot like this, but it really tends to shock people, and I really like that about it. This is Coronation Market. I did quite a bit of shooting around Coronation Market. Okay. This is in Portland. This is a close friend of mine. This is his house and his bedroom where I stayed. But again, looking at textilicity, looking at textile as more than just simply cloth, but looking at everything itself as being almost like a textile, even the actual walls and the interior of this house. Okay. Uh-oh. I think that is it for my slides. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yes, so I think I can just stop there. I think I gave a I hopefully was able to kind of explain just how my thinking process works, how my education kind of feeds into it, but also how my personal and emotional life are very much a part of what I do. So let me see if I can get back to the camera now. Yeah.
Quite an interesting presentation I have here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yes.
can, I can. Just want to um
Sorry.
go back to some of
Yes.
the comments.
Can you just give me 1 second, please?
Sure.
1 second. Sure. Yes, you can go ahead.
So just rolling back, had Amanda who said the change track was amazing. Um, she loved how you executed the architectural perspectives.
Mm.
And I I know you mentioned the depression affecting how
Hmm.
you processed the image, but she also
Yes.
asked what was the reason for choosing black and white for the perspective.
Okay, great. Fantastic question. Um, well, I think for me, color tends to, and I mean, we're all photographers. I think we all kind of think this way that, yeah, color is its own language, I think. And I also mean the absence of color. So for me, I felt it was important to reflect what I see, how I see the world as a depressive through the eyes of depression. And yes, most of the series that I do that I think have either portray or capture negative emotions. Or any series I work on, I like to play with color a lot. I'm obsessed with color, but I tend to, when it comes to things like emotional states, and those two series I started out with are both series that I think are, well, especially the second one, the monuments, is definitely, I think, a representation of what the world looks like when you are depressed. And I was really, for me, I think it would have been too easy and too inauthentic for me to be in a place as beautiful as Tuscany and try to translate all of that beauty when I wasn't experiencing it myself. I was in such a mess mentally while I was there. I was really not in a good place mentally. So I think it was important for me to represent that place in an authentic way. And the authentic way is to not see the beautiful color everywhere. And I really wanted to just think about um, a colorless world, a world that is really just about hard surfaces and rough surfaces. And I think that's what that series looks like to me. And that's what I think is important about the experience of depression that I want to sort of um, that I want to convey.
Okay. Just for
Is that
your
clear?
information, the photo with the prayer warrior,
Mhm.
Gerald says he knows the person. Her name is Apostle Lawrence.
Apostle Lawrence, wow, thank you so much. Mhm.
Uh, Marie said grief is a sign of true love.
Say that
And
again.
grief
Uh-huh.
is the sign of true love.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
I'm okay. I thought you were going to say something.
No, I think thank you so much for that point. I really, really, really it means a lot. And in fact, I wanted to just quickly read my description of the Hope Estate, the one about grief, because this is exactly what I have in my description. I say, this is a description for that same series, Hope Estate. Within the brief space of 4 months in 2001, I lost my father, mother, and grandmother. This cluster of traumatic events permanently shaped my life and my vision of the world. Those losses have had a profound effect on my mental health and have made me utterly incapable of loving fearlessly. and there was still more bereavement to come. In the words of musician Nick Cave, grief and love are forever intertwined. Grief is a terrible reminder of the depths of our love, and like love, grief is non-negotiable. So thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate that point, and that's something that I was always on my mind while doing that series, and I'm glad that you picked up on it.
Ah, perfect.
Sure.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Okay. In the beginning, Edward, when did you leave Woolmer's?
I left Woolmer's in 1991.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. In the beginning of you're a perfect storyteller. Can I tell you that?
Thank you.
And listen to you all night. In the beginning, I was very hyper. I was running behind you, trying to see what you never saw. I was trying to discover more. So there was a lot that you were looking at in the beginning. And I felt like I was just running behind you to decide what is it he's not looking at. Let me see if I can capture that. Well, you did very, very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My second observation is that you are able to present very well your understanding of culture in different spaces, and you're able to tell us more about it. So I will walk through cities, I will go to a lot of places and not put into the same context that you have what I see. I got a lot from you just listening. I enjoy that. I enjoy
so
that.
much.
I enjoy that.
Thank you.
Third observation was the importance of memory. You know, the association with ordinary things to tell the story of death and family and time and memory. That was fantastic. You are very, very good at storytelling. And I think that the photographs are just there to assist you. You should be writing poetry as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yes.
Do you write poetry?
No, I do. I write. In fact, I haven't doing. I have a full book manuscript that I put down for years now. So I'm just picking it back up now to try to get it published. But yes, I do write.
I enjoyed tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot to hear that. Thank you.
I believe Keon had her hand up at one point.
Sure.
You have something to say, Keon?
Hi, my friend Akin.
Hello.
It's Kian. Hey.
Hi. How are you?
Hey.
So good to hear your voice. I didn't even know you were going to join. Wow.
It's so good. Oh my gosh. This work has been, especially, with regards to your family, it was just fantastic. I'm gonna have to sit with that series for a bit. But with regards to textilicity, I had written in the chat actually that seeing that photo with the boy again, it really still just strikes me, and it makes me just think about how able he is to still run to what I call the collective maternal safety, because it also feels like he's diving into that kind of cocoon before his maturity will foster his separation. So it's just so much in that. That's my favorite one.
Right. And he was the child was always taunting me. Like he was standing there looking at me and smiling and then running there and come, because I guess he felt look, you can't do what I can do, kind of thing. So he just kept. So yes, it is my favorite from that series for sure. And I remember you talking about it. Sure.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. But let me not hijack the Zoom. But
no problem. Thank you.
Amanda was able to relate to your revisiting those places that cause so much pain or reminding you of so much pain. She said she went in a pharmacy today that she hasn't been in the past 6 years. The last time she was there, her father died while she was getting the prescription for it.
While getting the prescription.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I'm so
So
sorry. Yeah.
she said you were brave to revisit those spaces.
Yeah. And yeah, and then I thought that having revisited those places, I could always go back again because somehow you break the spell when you go back, but you don't. You really don't.
Hi,
So
I'm
it's
here actually, Amanda.
Oh,
Sorry.
Amanda.
Yes, hi. I was actually just one correction. He didn't die while I was there, but
Mhm.
I made it back to the house, but he didn't live long enough to even take the medication that I had to go and get for him. So you were quite brave to go back to those places because today, just by chance, I was like, well, this is the only pharmacy on my way home. Let me go. And I figured it's just a pharmacy. It's been 6 years, but it didn't upset me a lot, but it certainly moved me. And I was like, I didn't think it would hit me this much. But yeah, to be back in the same place and sit in the same waiting chair, I was like, yeah, it's a lot. So went
And
back.
I exactly, and I think especially Mona Chapel did that to me. Like
Yes, I saw that
I
one.
just going near to that place, and I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it. But just going
Trust me,
near to
it
the place,
hits
you
you.
feel the heaviness. Yeah.
Yes, it really
Hmm.
hits you. So right now, I actually just moved houses with my husband, and we're coming up on a year mark. And we moved into the townhouse he owns that is literally across the driveway in a gated community next door to the house that my father died in, that I literally watched him
Oh
take his
wow.
last breath. And so for a long
Yeah.
time, I didn't want to move here and live here because I'd like, it would just be a constant reminder of me waking up and seeing that house and even going into the house and seeing it. It took me a
Hmm.
while to go back there, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny how these things have such a powerful hold over
Yeah.
you.
Hmm.
I too lost my grandmother, father, and mother very close.
Oh
My
really?
grandmother passed away from cancer in 2018, and then my father 5 months later, and then my mother
Oh.
2 years later, the day after my birthday, which is coming up soon. So to lose
Mm.
my mother the day after
Hmm.
my birthday, yeah, it those back to back to back, and they
My
all died
God.
of
Yeah.
cancer. So I don't know if I
Yeah.
know when you were going through, I had asked if you were willing to disclose like how your parents passed,
Yes.
right? When
Absolutely. Yeah.
your
Yeah.
mother passed from an aneurysm, like that's a
Yeah.
huge shock.
Right.
You know,
And
all three of my
uh,
family members passed of cancer.
my dad passed off. My dad passed away due to he got esophageal cancer, and
Ah,
so and that was and it was a quick,
yes.
very quick
Same with my
descent.
father, diagnosed
Hmm.
and died within 9 months. That was it.
So yeah. It's and then go. Oops, sorry. Let me.
Mhm.
Oh, wait, I need to take off the Bluetooth. Yeah. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you
Yes,
still.
yes.
Good. Okay, good. I think I'm all right. Yes, and I think I walked. I think going back. Yeah, it's. Sorry. I think I'm no. I'm definitely feeling everything you're saying. It's just yeah. I think with especially with my father, going up there, well, anywhere in the Hope area, it just I realize everything just reminds me of them.
Yeah.
Everything, every single thing I look at reminds me of them, and reminds me of their life or some. And so yeah, I don't know if it's going to require multiple visits to just normalize these places again, make them become
Mhm.
something else, or should I just keep them like that, like this, just keep them the way I remember them as places of grief. Maybe this is where the cemetery is in my mind or something,
Mhm.
and that I should keep going back and maybe this is some kind of ritual or something that I'm doing. I still don't know
That's
yet.
the beauty in choice, you know. You have the choice to decide what you want to do. Certainly it depends on, is it that you want to get over these things, and get over in terms of what? Because someone said to me the other day, because I also just lost my grandparents 20 days apart this year. My grandmother, well, not 20 days, 2 months apart. My grandmother passed July 1, and then my grandfather passed August 19th, I believe. So this year, like this couple
Jesus,
months
wow.
gone, one to cancer and just basically old age. So, and then someone said to me, no, but why are you grieving them? And I wasn't taken aback in the sense when she asked me, I wasn't offended, because in that moment, a split second, it made me realize everybody thinks of grief differently. She's like, why are you grieving them? And I said, I'm not really. They transitioned, because I said goodbye to them a long time ago. You know, it's a matter about how you see death. And going back to your pictures here, you definitely capture how you feel very well. I was just talking about, I mean, no offense, it was very long. So I was also talking to somebody about what we're watching, you know, and I was explaining what you were talking about. And you know, I had done a little video and sent somebody, and they were saying, you know, if the pictures can't stand alone, then they haven't done their job. And I quite frankly, I disagree with that, because as Donette said, photography is storytelling, and you are an excellent storyteller. And I think, yes, the basis of photography is to capture what you see, but it goes so much deeper than that as an art. It's about what you see, not just with your eye, but what you see in your mind and what you see in your heart.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Those
But
three.
could I ask what the comment? Could you explain the comment a little more? That if the photo can't stand alone, I didn't think I got that clearly. If the
He
photo
was
can't stand
saying
alone,
that if without your narration, would anyone see what you're seeing? And the answer is, for some of them, like the tree ones in Hope Gardens, the answer, quite frankly, is no. But that doesn't really matter, because at that point, what's important from an artist or from artistic standpoint is the artist statement and your titles. Right?
yes, exactly.
So
That's good.
sure,
Very
you
good. Yeah.
don't necessarily, photography doesn't need to go and shouldn't need to depend on a narration, but certainly that is where your titles come into play. And if you hadn't described everything, but you you titled your pieces intentionally, which you do, and with meaning, then people will get it. Right. So like if you have these things on a gallery, and you have your artist statement and you have your title, people will get it. Sure, they may not get it crystal clear, but that's because grief is different to everyone. Right. But the way you capture it for yourself is absolutely stunning. I love the black and whites. Absolutely love the black and whites. I mean, I'm kind of biased towards black and whites, but I love that. And capturing and showing emotions is very important, because I said to my friend, you know, I actually shoot with the intention to confuse my viewer, because I want them to think beyond what they're seeing. Right?
Yes.
I did an expo the other day, and people came up to me, and I was talking to somebody, and then someone else was looking at my piece, and I could see the utter confusion on their face, and I was absolutely ecstatic, because it was the potential, and it actually happened, of conversation and communication. And that, to me, is what photography really is about. You know, what you're communicating with what you see, what you feel, and what you have in your mind as well.
Yeah, well said. Very beautifully said. And I would just add to that by saying that, well, I think that, yes, I think I wholeheartedly agree with you that the text, what we say is that in the humanities discourse, we say the text stands alone, which means exactly what you're saying. That a photo doesn't need an explanation. Of course, explanations and titles really, really help. And I think that goes for all artworks. I mean, you would hardly know what the hell, right? You wouldn't know what the hell Picasso is painting, or what the subject of his painting is at all, unless you read the title. Like Guernica. Like Guernica. If you look at that piece, Guernica, one of his most famous pieces, it's the bombing of the town, of the Spanish town of Guernica, and you wouldn't get it. I mean, you'd have to have somebody to
You would get
explain
it, yeah.
where Nika is, and if he hadn't given it that title, we wouldn't know what it's about. So
Exactly.
you're absolutely right about that. I will also say though that on the other hand, the opposite could be true. I mean, in a sense, I'm not necessarily agreeing with him, but the last series I did, Textilicity, which I just showed you, I made a choice to not title anything in that series. It's a completely untitled series, and that's because for the first time, I felt that I had a concept that I was working with, but I felt that each labeling and titling each individual photo would somehow take away, maybe from
I figured
from
that's what
all.
you're going to say, because yes, sometimes it can
Right.
skew the perception that your viewer is going to.
Exactly. Take the viewer in a direction that you want you want to be a little bit open. So sorry, and I remember putting the photograph that when I made this decision, it was that photograph of the dead dog.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think of what should I title this photograph. And I came up with a bunch of different titles, and I struggled with it. But then I thought, you know what, this photo could be about a whole bunch of different things at the same time. Yeah, it could be about the failure of urban planning.
Yeah.
Okay. It could be about the Jamaican government. It could be I mean,
about the fact that you had, forgive me, there was somebody walking right next to it, but they were cropped off. Right.
Yes.
It could also mean ignorance is not the right word, but kind of like a don't care attitude.
Nonchalance,
Like
exactly.
Nonchalant, that's the word. The person was
Yes,
walking
yes.
so casually next to this decaying thing.
Exactly.
My face was totally screwed up because that's a disgusting photo, but you know, yeah, it showed so many different things. So sometimes untitled 1, 2, and 3 is really where you need to go.
Right. Yes. And for the same reason, I just felt that and I'm glad you mentioned the guy walking by, the nonchalance, the fact that almost a kind of it's like you're looking at the image almost suggests that life is valueless, maybe.
Yes.
In the sense that
and you know what? I'm glad you said that, because especially in Jamaica, we really do not have that love for animals that most people have. And the fact that it was actually a dog and the person was walking by so casually, we really don't have a value for life. It could speak to, not just animals, but how much violence we have.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we become so immune to it, like it's no big deal.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. Yes. But you really, thank you so much for proving my point. That this is what I mean. Like, I think there's, to some extent, yes, you can have situations where a photo, if you give someone a kind of guiding concept, which is what I did with Textilicity, let people go wild. You just let people go wild with it and read different things into it. There was one shot I had with a girl in a sort of tiger print dress. This was in Port Antonio, and she's walking down the street. And at the exhibition, one guy came up to me and said, "Oh, did you realize that she has 2 phones?" And she does have 2 phones, but he was talking about, and what he saw was this woman juxtaposed with a woman walking behind her in the same shot. And the woman walking behind her looks like she works in a bank or something. So he was saying, what kind of girl is this? As in, the girl, the way she's dressed, and, in other words, he's seeing it as a kind of juxtaposition of, the girl of the streets, if you know what I mean.
Yes, Lady of the Night.
The Lady of the Night. That's what he saw. This Lady of the Night figure, especially because it's juxtaposed with a professional woman walking behind her. And that's kind of that made me excited, because then that's when I realized I made the right choice to kind of avoid titling.
Is it in this series here? Can you quickly flip to it, because we're still on the last one?
Yes. Now let me see how I do that again. Lord. Let me see. Oh, I'm not using my computer, and I don't know even how to.
Oh, Maria.
Can you see this? Can you see this?
I see the whole series, yes.
You see the whole series. Okay, good. Perfect.
Marie, don't make me chat off everybody's head, because left to me, I will chat off.
I know. Okay. Here's a piece. Here's the thing.
There it is. Right. Marie, jump in, man.
Right. So this was the shot.
Hold on, it's still very small.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Is that okay?
no.
It's still small? It's big for me.
Yes. Well, you have
Oh,
to share the right screen.
oh Jesus, and I don't know what to do, how to do that. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can.
That was definitely, oh, I see which one.
Yeah, maybe I could take another question in the meantime.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Mary wanted to ask something.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Akin. This is Marie.
Hey, hi, Marie.
Hi. I
I just want
just
to share this.
wondered what is the sequence of a normal routine for you in terms of your emotional state of mind. If you get up feeling depressed, do you go out intentionally to take black and white? Or
Oh, yeah.
should
Beautiful
you,
question.
is it normal that you take black and white when you're depressed, or you do
Oh,
try to
yes.
take some colors in order to avoid that depression? I just wonder
Wow.
what your
So,
sequence
yeah,
was like.
yeah. This is a very, very, very good question, and I think I have a hard question to answer too. Thank you, God. Very excellent question. Okay, I think it's a good question because I think yes, it's a question
Oh,
about
there
my
it is. I'm seeing it now.
right, about my process, and I think it's first of all, I feel the actual routine often involves throwing yourself out there in the world. I think you really just have to get up, yes, and go. I have to admit, yes, there are times when depression will keep me in my bed, wrapped up in sheets, and I can't go out. And in fact, I'm just going to be very open. I like I'm an open person, and I like to be open about things like mental health, to be honest. But I what in the examples I gave you, I think that was the example, especially of monuments, the black and white series that you're talking about. That was yes, that was with that. Well, no, I think I started the process of just taking photographs at first, going out every day, and in fact I was it was a I was with I was doing the residency with someone who I know very well as well, and we often would go another photographer who is here in the Netherlands, and we both would go out together. So he would sort of witness me in those moods. And I was able to just be very frank with him and to tell him how I was feeling and how bad everything was. And, I was just really full of despair and so on. And it was he who just kept insisting that we go out. He was like, no, don't waste the time. Let's go out, find something. And he kind of just kept on motivating me and motivating me. And so I forced myself to go out and to take those photographs. And what I started realizing is the more I took the photographs and the more I started seeing the pattern developing of what I was talking about, it had a strange effect on me. I started feeling better. So, in a sense, actually, spitting out the images and spending time with them and working through them and thinking through them, it really kind of took a lot of the edge off. It really started. I really started feeling a lot better. Maybe it's just when you start to fall in love with the images themselves, it transforms you a little bit more. So it's funny how I can now look back at that series with joy, and I really like it. I really love the series, and I think so. Yeah, I think it does something to the psyche when you go out and actually force yourself, even when you're depressed. But to be honest with you, it's one of the hardest things to do. And the last thing I will say about that is I just had a therapy session last, I see a therapist. I'm very proud to.
Uh-oh, we lost him.
I met with my therapist last week, and this was exactly what he said to me.
We
Because
lost
I was
you for
talking.
a second, Akin.
Oh,
You said
sorry.
you said you were very proud, and then you kind of cut off.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I was saying I think I probably need to come off of these earphones. Yeah. But I was talking to my therapist, and he last week, and he was telling me precisely this. He said, you have to challenge yourself. And he said, you have to challenge yourself with your artwork. You have to see your artwork as part of the healing process. And this is a new idea for me. It's a new idea for me. It's barely a week old.
Right.
But he was just saying to me, is there a way you can, instead of sitting down there and thinking of photography as the opposite of being home and depressed and bedridden, or just not getting out of your bed, can you see photography as playing a role there? Can you still use photography in these moments? And it's something I'm still playing with, because one of the things I think I really want to start doing now, maybe that's going to be one of my next project. I really want to focus on mental health itself. So that's going to be a project, and I still don't know what it's going to look like yet, but I really want to look at the interior world of my own mind. And so this might be a photo project that I may not leave the house. I may stay here. I may focus on objects within my own living space. I might focus on triggers within my own living space. I may focus on the things about my house that really, really makes me not happy. And not that I don't have I like my house, but the memories that houses can store over time are what I'm talking about. And I think, I really want to follow my therapist's advice and really confront with the camera, with my mind, with my experience, confront these things head on and see what comes of it. So that your question really puts me at, this is exactly where I'm at right now. The question you just asked me. So thank you so much. You're almost like a kind of you're almost clairvoyant or something. But yes.
Thank you for answering in such detail.
Thank you so much. I'm still trying. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, you can see it.
Wait, hold on. I can't. What am I missing?
I can see your
there he
face.
is.
You can see my face. Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. Yes.
I need to change my view then.
So Amanda had asked if you had any challenges photographing people.
Oh, yeah. God, you guys have great questions. Of course. Especially since this is documentary photography and I do a lot of street photography. And I'm glad you raised this, because it's everywhere you go. I will say though, I was expecting a bigger challenge in Jamaica than I got. Because I mean, again, Jamaica was never a place where you could just take photos of people and I mean, you could easily get your ass beaten up in a place like Jamaica where you just up and take photographs of people. But
yes.
But on the other hand, I think I feel like things have really, really changed in the sense of, I think, of course, smartphone technology has taken over Jamaica, and now people just take photographs everywhere. And because the act of taking a photograph is now so normal, you become a lot less conspicuous than I think generations ago. But I'm saying that to say, though, that yes, I have had challenges. I've had lots of challenges. Fortunately, nothing too unfortunate. And I've had those challenges in various places, not just Jamaica, where people are like, "What the hell are you doing?" No. What do you? When I was in Cape Verde, when I was living in Cape Verde, I had a group of people who I thought were at the time we were already good friends, but they came to me one day after knowing me for about a year, and then confessed to me that they thought that I was working for the FBI, and I said, "What?" And they said, "Yes, because you just came from Jamaica. Nobody knows where you come from. Nobody knows what you're doing here."
Oh, you broke up or you froze. Did he freeze everybody or just?
And he had a story between Brazil and and Europe.
Because you froze for a bit. You froze.
Oh, I froze. Sorry. Yeah. What was the last thing you heard me say?
You said a lot.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying
about
that
FBI.
Yes, yeah. And he freeze again. Oh God. Poor thing.
There.
Yeah, you
I
froze.
think
Like we
I
didn't
think
get
your
any of
connection
that.
Froze? All right. All right. Any better now?
Yeah,
Okay.
no. What? Yes.
No, it's freezing. Oh,
It's going
Lord.
back and forth to freeze, yeah.
Jesus. But can you hear my voice?
We can hear, no, we couldn't. When you froze, we couldn't. So you
Okay.
chimed in and said something about FBI and you tried again and then we lost you again.
Okay. How is it now?
It's better. See how long it lasts.
Hello?
All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Akin. Can you hear?
Yeah.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear. Good. Yes, no, I just to be quick with that story. Yeah, I was once accused of being an undercover FBI agent at one point. I think my funniest story recently was when I was doing the Tropical Cyberpunk series, and I had gone to, I love telling the story, but I had spent one afternoon and into the night photographing in and around Halfway Tree, the Halfway Tree bus park, the whole Halfway Tree bus terminus, the whole area of Halfway Tree. I spent the whole maybe about 3 hours just photographing on one day, and then the next day I decided to go downtown and do some photography around Parade area. And I walked off, I think it was one of the sites, Last Street or one of them I was on. And this guy just walked up to me out of the blue and said, what are you doing? Where are you? And I said, I told him I'm a photographer. And so we are photograph. And I told him that, I'm just a regular photographer and so on. And he was like, I saw you last night in Halfway Tree,
Uh-oh.
And when he said that, I freaked out because I'm like, I really was in Halfway Tree the night before. And I said, no, Kingston can't be that big, can't be that small.
But it is,
but he did see me. He must have seen me because I was definitely in Halfway Tree taking photographs, and he saw me. So that it was, and funny enough, he kind of just said, okay, I walked away. But it just left me with this feeling like, shit, people see you. People can people notice you. So it made me feel a little bit weird. And I felt, oh my God, I need to be careful. I wonder if something bad can happen. But then nothing really bad happened. There was one time during that same series when one guy got a little aggressive, because I hadn't taken any photograph of him, but he saw me taking photographs and he got a bit aggressive. So, this can happen from time to time. I mean, it's just one of the hazards of the trade, especially if you're doing street photography.
Photojournalism, yeah, it's one where I don't do much. I do abstract and nudes in studio.
Yes, that's something exactly. I
have control and safety.
Right, I do abstract outside as well too, but yeah, I tend to do if it's portraiture, any kind of stage photography, I would do it in studio.
Simone commented, just want to thank you for sharing your work with us. It was a pleasure to view your work, listen to your stories, and go through the journeys with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Akin?
Other questions?
Just for you to share your contact.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. How do I do that? Could I just tell you?
Type it in the chat, or you can just tell me now.
Yeah, where is it? Oh, the chat is here. Jesus Christ, I'm so bad with this. Yeah, okay, I see the chat, and Edward. This is my, yeah.
Show my age when I can't see nothing.
Right. So that is my, oh yeah. So this is my Instagram and my website. Did I get, I hope I got this right. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, I just posted the website on my Insta. So yes, please follow me. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for your time, Akin.
Thank you very much. This was quite a thrill.
You are welcome.
And did anybody take photographs of this or?
Well, it's being recorded, so
it's being recorded.
You can
Yes.
always share the recording with you.
So please, if you can send me a copy, I would really love that.
All right. Good to see you.
Right. Thank you so very much. This is quite an honor.
Yeah, man, this
Good
is
to have
definitely
you.
very good.
Love hearing your stories.
Thank you so much. And of course, when I'm back home, I would love to come. I'm going to make sure I'm going to make it my duty to come and visit your meeting and meet all of you in person.
That would be great.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful, Akin.
Thank you so very much. I'm really, 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 really heartened. Thank you. And Doris, thank you so much for for making this even possible.
No problem.
And of course, to the Photography Society.
And let's plan some more great things for next year.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Night, night.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you once again for having me. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Some of us know, okay?
Okay.